What if a police officer pulled you over, found something in your trunk, and then said, "I don't have the evidence list in front of me," and drove away? What if that officer came back 20 years later and told you, "If it mattered, we would have found it by now"? And what if the only thing more dangerous than a lie was a system that confidently says, "Nothing is there," without ever checking everything? This is not a normal hearing. This is a controlled stress test of the system itself, run live, on the record, with the clock ticking down. On September 17th, 2025, Ted Lieu walks into a congressional hearing room with 5 minutes, and he does not improvise, he does not wander. He executes, step by step, a sequence designed to expose not just what Kash Patel knows, but what the FBI cannot confidently say it knows. He starts safe, deliberately safe, almost boring, because that's how you build a trap that no one sees coming, by making every step feel obvious, unthreatening, procedural. The FBI searched Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan residence, correct? Patel hesitates, adjusts the timeline. "I believe that happened in 2018. Maybe 2 locations." Lieu corrects him, 2019, locks the date into the record, not as a detail, but as a foundation, because every strong case starts with time, place, and documented action. Then he moves 1 inch forward. "In that residence, the FBI found a safe, correct?" Patel does not confirm, not directly, he deflects. "I don't have the catalog of evidence in front of me." That's not an answer, that's a retreat. And Lieu doesn't chase it emotionally, he repeats the question. Same wording, same tone, forcing the record to either accept or reject a simple fact. Patel folds, "I'll accept your representation." And just like that, the first brick is set. Now Lieu escalates. "In that safe, the FBI found topless and lewd photographs of girls, correct?" Again, no direct confirmation, again the same phrase, "I'll accept your representation." Notice what is happening here. The FBI director is not owning the evidence. He is borrowing the questioner's version of it, which means the agency is present in the investigation, but not fully standing behind its own findings. Lieu doesn't argue. He brings receipts. He cites the New York Times, July 8, 2019, documenting the discovery of nude photographs in Epstein's safe. A mainstream, time-stamped, verifiable source entered cleanly into the narrative, turning media reporting into part of the evidentiary stack. Then he does something more dangerous. He introduces a witness, not in the room, but on tape, Michael Wolff, a man who sat with Jeffrey Epstein, who watched him open that safe, who describes what he saw inside, not as rumor, but as first-hand observation. The clip plays. Photographs spread out like playing cards, and in those images, according to Wolff, appears Donald Trump. This is the pivot point. Because up until now, this was about a safe, a search, a set of images. Now it becomes about a name. Lieu doesn't accuse. He asks a broader question, almost deceptively neutral. Are there any photographs showing Donald Trump with girls of an uncertain age? And this is where the system reveals itself. Patel answers, no. Not, we have not found any. Not, there is no verified evidence. But no, followed by a justification that becomes the entire case against him. Because if such photographs existed, they would have already been discovered over the last 20 years by multiple administrations and investigators. That sounds confident. It sounds institutional. It sounds like closure. But listen carefully. That is not evidence. That is faith in a process. And in a courtroom, faith is not proof. And Ted Lieu doesn't challenge that statement with emotion. He dismantles it with one example, one document, one crack in the foundation that turns confidence into vulnerability. Because if the system is as complete as Kash Patel claims, then nothing significant should be missing. Nothing should surface outside of it. Nothing should appear late, unaccounted, undocumented. But that's not what happened. A birthday message, written by Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein, did not come from the FBI, did not come from any prior administration, did not come from the 20-year investigative machine that Patel just defended. It came from the Epstein estate. It surfaced only after a disclosure by the Wall Street Journal. And just like that, the entire argument, we would have found it by now, collapses under its own weight because something important, something real, something directly tied to a central figure was not found by the system at all. Lieu doesn't need to raise his voice. He just points at the gap. And Patel says it himself. You make a great point. That sentence matters more than any denial because it is an admission that the system is not closed, not complete, not fully aware of what exists outside its own files. And once that door is open, Lieu walks straight through it. He shifts from what was found to what was never pursued. Has the FBI interviewed Michael Wolff, the only known eyewitness who claims he saw the contents of that safe? Patel doesn't say yes. He doesn't say no. He says, "I'm not personally aware." This is not a junior analyst. This is the director of the FBI, unable to confirm whether his agency has spoken to the one person who claims direct knowledge of potentially critical evidence. Lieu tightens the frame. Has the FBI subpoenaed the tapes, over 100 hours of recorded conversations between Wolff and Epstein? Again, I don't know. Two questions, two unknowns, both tied to primary sources, both unanswered at the highest level. This is no longer about a missing photograph. This is about a pattern where key leads exist, but are not clearly accounted for. A pattern where evidence may be out there, but not fully in here. And then comes the third pressure point, the Epstein estate. The same external source that produced the birthday message the FBI never had. Lieu asks the question directly. Why not subpoena everything they have? Why not legally compel the full archive, every document, every file, every recording? Patel responds with something that sounds procedural, almost bureaucratic. The estate is under no obligation to provide that material, even pursuant to a subpoena. And that is where the tone shifts, because Lieu doesn't negotiate with that statement. He cuts it off. That's just false. No qualifiers. No hedging. You're the FBI. You can subpoena information, and you better do that. This is not a policy disagreement. This is a fundamental contradiction about what the most powerful investigative agency in the country can or cannot do. On one side, the director, saying the door may remain closed. On the other, a congressman, saying the law gives you the key. And neither position is resolved in that moment. They move on. But the record does not, because what has now been established, clearly, sequentially, and without interruption, is that the FBI director does not know if the key witness has been interviewed, does not know if critical recordings have been secured, and accepts that relevant materials exist outside the agency's control. That is not a gap. That is a system with blind spots. And blind spots are where the most important facts tend to hide. And now Ted Lieu stops building the case and tests it. Because once you establish that the system has gaps, once you show that evidence can exist outside official files, once you prove that key witnesses may not even have been contacted, then the next question is no longer procedural. It's binary. It's yes or no. And that's exactly where he goes. He pivots to something that has already been acknowledged publicly, something that cannot be dismissed as speculation, something confirmed earlier in the same year by Pam Bondi. The existence of an Epstein client list. Not a rumor, not a theory, a list, a document. A record of names tied to one of the most scrutinized criminal networks in modern history. Lieu doesn't ask what's on the list. He doesn't ask for classification. He doesn't ask for interpretation. He asks a simpler question, the kind that strips away complexity and leaves no room to hide behind language. Is Prince Andrew on the Epstein client list? Patel answers, the material related to Prince Andrew has been made public. The index has been released. That is not a yes. That is not a number. That is a redirection. Lieu does not react. He repeats the structure. Same tone, same pressure, same trap. Is Donald Trump on the Epstein client list? And Patel gives the exact same answer, word for word. The index has been released. The index will speak for itself. Two questions, two names, two non-answers. This is the moment where the hearing stops being about evidence and becomes about avoidance. Because when a question is that simple, when it is framed that narrowly, when it requires nothing more than confirmation of a name on a document that already exists, silence is not neutral. Silence is a choice. Lieu sees it instantly. He doesn't accuse. He doesn't speculate. He states it for the record. That is a huge red flag. And he's not talking about guilt. He's not claiming wrongdoing. He's identifying a failure at the level of response, at the level of transparency, at the level of institutional clarity. Because this is not a classified briefing. This is not a covert operation. This is a public hearing. And the director of the FBI cannot answer a yes or no question about whether a specific name appears on a list that the government itself acknowledges exists. Now step back and look at the full chain. The FBI found a safe. The contents of that safe are partially documented through media, partially described by a first-hand witness, and partially unverified within official channels. A key external source, the Epstein estate, has already produced at least one document that the FBI never had. The director cannot confirm whether the primary witness has been interviewed, cannot confirm whether critical recordings have been subpoenaed, cannot assert control over all relevant materials. And when asked the simplest possible question about a confirmed document, he points somewhere else. The index has been released. That phrase repeats, not as information, but as deflection. Because if the answer were clear, it would have been given. If the answer were definitive, it would have been stated. And when clarity is replaced with reference, when a name is replaced with a document, when a yes or no question becomes a citation, that's not transparency. That's distance. And distance, in a case like this, is not accidental. It is constructed. And this is where the hearing stops being about one man, one list, one exchange, and becomes a question about the system that is supposed to hold all of it together. Because 6 months after that room went silent, after those 2 names were asked and never answered, after those gaps were exposed on the record, nothing essential changed. Pam Bondi was removed from her position, officially tied to her handling of the Epstein files, a personnel shift that signals pressure, but not resolution, movement, but not clarity. Michael Wolff, the only known witness who claims to have seen the contents of that safe, still had not been publicly confirmed as interviewed. The tapes, those 100 hours of recorded conversations with Jeffrey Epstein, still had not been confirmed as subpoenaed. The Epstein estate, already proven to hold material the FBI did not, had still not been legally compelled to produce everything in its possession. And the simplest question that Ted Lieu asked in that room, is Donald Trump on the list, still had not received a direct answer from anyone. Now put that into a real-world frame. Imagine a case involving victims, real victims, not headlines, not politics. Young girls whose images were stored, cataloged, hidden inside a safe, treated not as human beings but as evidence of access, of power, of something that was never meant to be seen. Imagine being told that the system searched the house, opened the safe, collected what it could, and then left behind questions it cannot fully answer, witnesses it has not clearly pursued, materials it has not definitively secured. Imagine being told that the people with the authority to compel truth are still negotiating with uncertainty. This is the moral break, because this is no longer about whether a name appears on a list. This is about whether the system that claims to investigate exploitation is actually exhausting every path to uncover it. And right now, based on that record, it isn't clear. Not because there is no evidence, but because the process itself has gaps that have been admitted, documented, and left unresolved. This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Ordinary people don't get to say, "I don't know," when the question is this direct. Ordinary investigations don't stop at, "The index has been released," when the answer requires a name. Ordinary cases don't leave key witnesses unconfirmed and critical materials unsecured while time passes and accountability drifts. But this isn't ordinary. This is power intersecting with process. And when that happens, the rules don't always break. They bend. Just enough to create distance between a question and its answer. So here's the question you're left with. If the FBI can't confirm whether it has pursued every lead, if it can't say with certainty that it has seen every piece of evidence, if it can't answer a yes or no question about a name on a known document, then what exactly does complete investigation mean? And more importantly, does the law apply equally to everyone, or only to those who cannot outlast the process? Because in that room, on that day, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that wasn't said. If you want more breakdowns like this, clear, precise, on the record, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who still believes the system always closes the loop, and subscribe. Because the moments that matter aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones where the answer never comes.